Hello, everyone. This is Kendall Rothis from Nevertheless She Preached, and I am so honored to be welcoming some guests with us today to talk about what is happening currently in Gaza and the West Bank. And so I'm going to bring them onto this stage now. First, we have Rania Badran. She's coming up right here. And then we also have, let me get 1 second. There we go. And there we have Dr. Paige Rawson. So hello to both of you. Thanks for being here. I'm so glad you're here. I am not going to spend a long time on their bios because I want us to be able to dive right in. I know this is some really important information that I want to get out to all of those who are listening. So I'm just going to say really quickly, and then I'll let them fill in what they think that you should know about them. Rania is a Palestinian American Muslim who is a human rights activist, a graduate student, and she's currently finishing her master's in public health. And Dr. Paige Rawson is a writer, speaker, life coach, and a biblical scholar. And they are here to help us understand what is happening right now in Palestine and to Palestinians, what the history is of this conflict, and also the ways that Christian theologies have played a role in the current state of affairs. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's just start by having you tell me a little bit, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what your connection to Palestine is, why you're invested in this. Rania, would you go first?
Yeah, thank you. So as Kendall said in my bio, I'm a Palestinian American. And so I was born and raised in the United States, but I go back to Palestine almost every summer with my family. My grandparents were all born in Palestine. My parents grew up and lived in Palestine through their childhoods. And so it's been an integral part of my life, my Palestinian identity. And all throughout my life, I've just been working within my communities in North Carolina and Ohio to, organize and to teach people about Palestine. And I work with different nonprofits, one specifically the PCRF, Palestine Children's Relief Fund, where we raise money for children in Gaza or in Palestine or any war-torn country in the Middle East that needs our help.
And you have friends and family currently in the West Bank and Gaza?
Yes, I still have family living in the West Bank, and I have friends that I have grown up with living in Gaza.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. What about you, Paige?
Yeah. So my story is definitely different than Rania's. I actually grew up and was raised in the Panhandle of Florida, Southern Baptist, and so it's interesting because I spent years and years in the thick of the very theology that in a lot of ways has condoned and supported colonialism, and actually what's in fact happening currently in Palestine. It's interesting because it's my queerness that didn't let me stay in the church. And in fact, I think my queerness that led me to start to deconstruct the Bible and to start to deconstruct these narratives and the ideology that that undergirds the theologies in the texts that have been utilized in these ways. And when I say utilized, I mean weaponized, right? Weaponized to evangelize, to colonize, and to terrorize minoritized people. So, right. And I'm thinking right now more broadly, non-white, non-Christian, non-Western, non-heterosexual, non-male, non-able-bodied, non-upper class, or middle class. And this all done in the name of God. And I remember reading, the law, right? The 10 Commandments and that text about not taking the Lord's name in vain. And I began to realize in my 20s, the way in which the name of God was being used to justify genocide. And so we see that also in the United States in Manifest Destiny, right? In the way in which 8% of the world. Oh, here I go. I'm already starting to go, Rania. Right, but just the way that 8% of the world, which is Western Europe, right, of the globe, 8% is Western European, has colonized 80% of our planet. Which we can maybe get into that later. But so the thing about Palestine, right, is that I realize how intimately connected my own roots and the theology that I was brought up in is connected to what is happening right now in Palestine. And so that's why I got committed. I mean, this is my mid-20s. I started doing work in the Philippines, and also started to protest what was happening in Palestine. And I think at that time too, I started to realize how strategically the United States has been in where they're positioning or who they're investing money in, specifically military. But anyhow, so okay, so I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. And if anyone wants to know more about our guests, their bios are on our Instagram and Facebook. You can go read more about them. And I think I just realized, I think I forgot to say welcome to those of you who are listening. I got really excited about diving right in. So if you are joining us, I'm so grateful for your attention, and please feel free to drop us a line in the comments letting us know where you're joining from, where you're listening from. And if you hear anything today that particularly touches your heart or resonates with you, feel free to let us know in the comments, and we might even just feature one of your comments here on our live broadcast. Thank you, Maya, for joining us from Austin. Okay, so I want to get started here by asking, or saying rather, that I think that at this point, most of us, I hope, are at least somewhat aware of the atrocities that are happening in Gaza, in the West Bank. I think, just from my observations of social media, that what a lot of people are missing, or at least confused about, is the much longer history that preceded these recent events, which is part of why I wanted to talk with the two of you to help us understand the larger context and history of Palestine. So let's start with what is happening right now. What can you tell us about what is happening right now to communities of Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and elsewhere?
Rania, do you want to go over the numbers and the figures that we're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, you have them, right?
Yeah, I got them.
You can start. Okay.
Let's do it. So the both of us right now just want to highlight not just the number of Palestinians who have died, but also really thinking about the displacement and the lack of resources, and the way that Israel's been controlling that. So there are over 11,000 Palestinians that have been killed since Israel started this offensive. 41% of those are children. On average, then, one child in Gaza is killed every 10 minutes by Israel. Wow. There are still thousands, and we don't even know yet how many thousands of bodies are buried under the rubble in Gaza. Survivors, we have to remember, right, are now without access to water, food, fuel, and medicine. And we've been seeing most recently what's happening in Al-Shifa. Over 1.6 million people have been displaced in Gaza due to Israel's siege. Over 45% of housing units and over 50% of civilian infrastructure in Gaza have been entirely destroyed. Rania?
Yeah, I think it's also important to note with those numbers that Dr. Rawson just, named for us, these still, the number increases every minute. And we don't have the most accurate number because the numbers were coming from the people working in the Shifa hospital, which is currently under siege by the ground invasion that Israel has begun. And so the military has taken over the Shifa hospital. I think it's also important to know, what is normally happening in Gaza. They normally receive about 400 trucks daily to help the people, and that's still not enough to cover the needs of the population living in Gaza. And so, the population of Gaza, it's over 2 million people, half of which is children, and they're all living in one of the most densely populated areas in the world. It's 25 miles long. At its widest, it's 6 miles wide, right? And so these people are already crammed into this tiny space. And so now, on average, they're receiving less than 14 trucks of aid. And most of the aid that is coming in, it's being reported that the food that's being coming in is expired. And some trucks, instead of carrying food or water, has body bags on them because of the amount of dead. And it's also important to note that these trucks are also being targeted. Once they enter Gaza, they're still being targeted by the airstrikes and the people that are still in the north. Because although the media wants to tell everyone that everyone's moved south, everyone has not moved south. There was a million people living in the south. There's still hundreds of thousands living up in the north of the Gaza Strip, and they have all been without food and water and any of this aid that's been coming in for the last 40 plus days. And as much as we're talking about Gaza, it's also important to know what is happening in the West Bank, because violence in the West Bank has risen by crazy levels. There have been bombings in Jenin, and Jenin is in the north of the West Bank. There have been attacks on mosques in Ramallah. Bedouin families have been displaced. 190 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank alone by the IOF, the Israeli occupation forces. And Palestinians throughout the West Bank are being arrested just for being a political speaker, for being an activist. They are being arrested. And we're getting stories of people who, if the IOF go into their house and they can't find the man that they're trying to arrest, they're arresting his wife and his kids until he comes and turns himself in. And Israel already had, before this aggression started, 4,500 Palestinians were political prisoners. And this number has now doubled to 10,000 political prisoners, some of which are names that, if you have been following what's been happening in Palestine, Ahad Tamimi, for example, a girl, she's my age. She has been arrested multiple times by the Israeli occupation forces, and this time she has also been taken. She hasn't been able to speak to her lawyer. She hasn't been given a fair trial. All things that Israel preaches that they're doing that they aren't actually doing. And people in the West Bank and the occupied 48 territories, which is known as the modern settler colonial state of Israel, are being arrested, and they're taken without charges, and they're being punished just so much for liking a post or sharing a post that sympathizes with the people of Gaza, not calling for a ceasefire, not calling for a humanitarian pause even, just because they see a post that sympathizes with the people of Gaza. They're being arrested, they're being punished, they're being humiliated in the streets. And even thinking about Palestinians and Muslims alike living in the United States and throughout the Western world, and throughout the world in general, they have all been subjected to more hate crimes, and Islamophobia has risen throughout the world.
Yeah. So if we were trying to do this live in Israel, we would be getting arrested right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have even started.
It wouldn't even start. Yeah. Just listening to those numbers and those statistics, it's making my stomach turn. And I'm still someone who's fairly far removed from all of this violence. And Rania, you were able to just share all of that information so calmly. But I'm also wondering, what is it like for you watching this unfold and having family and friends who live there? Like, what is it doing to your heart and your body?
Yeah, it's honestly, there's no words to describe the pain and the heartbreak that I'm feeling, that all Palestinians are feeling, that even if you're not a Palestinian, the people that love Palestine are feeling. It's a very scary time, especially when you have family that still live there, because we fear for their safety every single day. And just all these memories start coming back every day. You just remember what life is like in Palestine, what the land is like, what, our life is like over there. And your heart breaks every minute, every time you think about, what's going on and how we're trying our best to stop it from here. And, there is a tide changing, but it's not changing fast enough.
Mhm.
And it's soul crushing.
Mm.
And one of the things that we've been talking about, Rania and I work together very closely, is just the nightmares, the lack of sleep, right? All of those symptoms of trauma. And we've talked a lot about how Palestinians are not experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. It's very much present.
Mm.
And so, we talk about, for those of us who work with trauma, we talk a lot about, right, compassion fatigue or secondary trauma. And one of the things that I think about with Rania, with her family, with the Palestinians that I know is the way in which this is living in your body all the time, every day, the pain that you're holding. And this is, I think, the problem that I have. And Kendall, you didn't ask this question, but this is the issue that I'm having with those of us who are people of faith, that we are called to compassion, and that we are called to empathy, and that we are called to action in that. And so I'm having an issue with the people who so easily, in our Western European individualism, right, in our American exceptionalism, living in a first world country with our first world issues, can so easily turn our eyes and be apathetic and completely indifferent. And then on top of that is what Western news syndicates, what US news syndicates are doing, and what they're giving us in the kind of propaganda. I mean, every time, and Rania and I continue to talk about this, every single time you read any article from the Times, you name it, all of them, right? What do they do at the very beginning? At the very beginning, they want to remind you of October 7th, Hamas attacked Israel.
Yeah.
And it's a lie, right? And they're repeating it. And this is what they do. This is one of their tactics, right? Psychologically.
Help us understand, why is it a lie? Tell us why it's a lie for people.
Good. So if we're talking about the timeline and the history, and Rania, I want to encourage you to share if you want to. Kendall, are you cool if we kind of talk a little bit about the 75 years and what's happened?
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next question, is about, help us understand the bigger timeline. But I just, when I heard you say, that's a lie, I'm thinking, okay, there's people listening that are going to be like, what? What does that mean?
No, that's a good point.
So help us understand
context.
Yeah, the context. Why is that thing that we are hearing every day on the news over and over again? Why is that a lie? And then
Good. Beautiful. So this did not start October 7th. It is very important to know that Hamas, whatever Hamas did, was not an offensive. Okay. This was not an attack that had been unprovoked. Right. And this is when I think that great pedagogue of the oppressed, Paulo Freire, has so much to say to us about this, right? This is a situation that was in response to, right? When people are dehumanized and oppressed for so many years, this is what will happen in response when they want to humanize themselves. And I'm not saying, this is not about justifying what happened. This is just understanding. So this has been going on for 75 years, right? 75 years. And Rania, I want you to talk a little bit about that history. And I know we have a map too of this, so that we can really understand, where did this start? What has been happening over the course of this past 75 years, and what led us right now to where we are? Go ahead.
Okay. So if we go backwards, start in like 1948, what happened?
Yes. So I'll try to be as simple as possible, given the whole history. But the first thing I want to start with is that Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, and Jews all lived together peacefully in the land of Palestine before 1948. And so one of the first big things that we need to talk about is the Balfour Declaration that happened in 1917. This was created during the First World War by the British, and it was created to give support, to support giving the Jewish people a homeland. Okay. And so what is wrong with this? Well, the British were giving them what they want to say is a land without a people for a people without a land. But that's false, because Palestine did have people living in it. It was the indigenous people, the Palestinian people, that are still living in the land to this very day. Um, and so, we're going to fast forward now to 1947, 1948, where it's this following World War II and the Holocaust. Palestinians opened their homes and their land to welcome the Jewish refugees who had survived the Holocaust. Unlike the United States and unlike other and Western European countries that did not want to accept any refugees that were coming out of the Holocaust. And so then it led us into what happened in 1948, which is what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, which translates in English to the catastrophe. This is when over 750,000 people were expelled from their homes. And this is, yeah. So if we look at this map, 1947, you can see Palestine is in the light beige color. And so that was the land the way it was. 1948 comes and people are being expelled during the Nakba. And this is where we first start to see the creation of the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank. And then I say the occupied West Bank because if we go to present day, you can see how little land is actually left in the West Bank for the Palestinians, because although all of the land from 1948 was supposed to, the West Bank from 1948 was supposed to still be for the Palestinians, it has been infiltrated by settlements, illegal Israeli settlements that continue to be built every single minute, every single day. You can take the map back down or keep it up, whatever you prefer. And so, in 1948, we saw the massacres in villages like the ones in Deir Yassin and Tantura. And these massacres, they're very similar to what we're seeing in Gaza today, where anyone that was just walking the street was shot and killed immediately. People, were paraded around the streets, like men were like gathered on beaches together and they were shot and they were killed one by one. And then there's just mass graves that people to this day are still learning the history about what's happened. And there's movies that actually talk about this. And there's actually a movie about Tantura where the soldiers that committed these massacres talk about what they did and how they did it. And some of them say it remorsefully and regretfully, and some of them still talk about it like it was the best thing that they've ever done in their life. And all of these are not just one and done incidents. This has continued every single day to Palestinians since 1948. The expansion of the West Bank settlements. We now have, if you go visit Palestine, you'll see signs when you drive through the towns. It says this is area A. This is under Palestinian Authority rule. You'll see areas B and C. That means that they are closer to an illegal Israeli settlement. And so the Israeli military has more of a rule over the land. And so Palestinians living in these areas have no control over what happens on their land. Any settler, if they want to, can go on their land, burn their olive trees, ruin their crops, release hogs, release dogs, whatever it is to ruin the land for them. And they can't say a word. They can't even fix their houses. If something breaks in the house, they have to go and apply for a special permit to get it fixed. And if they don't apply for the permit and they get it fixed anyways, the military will come and remove it. They'll break it. They'll destroy it. And, going back to Gaza, Gaza has been under a siege and a blockade for the last 16 years. They have not been able to have their own control over their fuel, their water, their electricity. It has all been under Israel's control, not just the last 40 days. This has been going on for 16 plus years, where you couldn't go into Gaza. Me, as a Palestinian from the West Bank, I have never been allowed to enter Gaza because I'm a Palestinian from the West Bank. Only people from Gaza are allowed back into Gaza. Or if you get a very special permit that they do not offer. And you can only cross through the Rafah crossing, which is the one connected to Egypt, or the Erez crossing, which is the one that connects to the Israeli occupied territories.
Can you say the names real quick of some of those movies in case people want to find them?
Yeah. So I recommend, I haven't watched Tantura, so I'm not going to recommend that one totally. I've just seen small clips of it, but I really recommend Five Broken Cameras. I recommend Farha on Netflix. Born in Gaza is also on Netflix. The Present is also on Netflix. And I'm saying on Netflix because most everyone has a Netflix subscription these days. And so it's easy to find these movies. And those are all very good resources. I even recommend, there's so many new interviews that are happening now that also are talking about the history, and to make sure that you're following, different creators and Palestinian voices that are talking about this. So like lawyer Nuda Arakat, she's a great resource to be listening to. You can also learn more on the Palestine Academy. You can just type it on Instagram or on Google and you'll find it. And it's like little modules that Palestinians have created to tell you about our side of the history, because that's the side that's never shown in the Western media. You can follow, who else can you follow? There's a lot of people, but especially on the ground, I recommend also following people like Martez and Plestia, and I can, help put the names in the chat in a minute. And Hind, these are people that live in Gaza. They've lived in Gaza their whole lives, and they're still in Gaza now, and they're documenting as much as they possibly can, while still being threatened by the Israeli occupation forces with assassination attempts on their life because they're reporting what's happening.
Wow. How can you also, I mean, that was such a helpful just description of the history and what's been happening. You did a beautiful job putting something really big into some succinct language. We have a comment here about, is there going to be a full list of these recommendations available? Yes, Maya, we will make that happen for everyone. I am wondering, Rania, how that history has intersected with your family's history. Like, where did this impact your family specifically?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't even go through everything that's happened, specifically the parts that actually affected my family the most.
Yeah.
And so, we go into the 1980s, where we see the first Intifada, the first uprising that happened, where the Palestinians were trying to get some of their land back. And that one actually really affected my family because at that point, my grandfather was kicked out of Palestine, and my mom and my uncle, they were living there at the time. They were removed from the land. They had their passports stamped "Do not return," and they were kicked out of Palestine. And they did not know if they were ever going to be able to return in their lifetime until the Oslo Accords were signed. And so we saw that as a historic moment. It was supposed to be such a great peace treaty. It was supposed to stop the building of settlements. It was supposed to make sure that the Jerusalem was for all people, Palestinians, Israelis, everyone to be able to go to the Holy Land and visit. Has not happened. Nothing of that has been upheld. The one thing it did allow was that my family was allowed to return.
Okay.
And so we were able to go back after the Oslo Accords were signed. My family lived through the second Intifada in Palestine, which is the second uprising, which happened in the early 2000s. My grandparents, my aunt, and my uncle all lived through that. And to this day, I still have family that lives in the West Bank. My family, we go back and forth. My grandparents, we go back and forth. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Did your family have anywhere to go when they were kicked out? How did they figure out where to go?
So they did come back to the United States.
Okay.
They didn't want to. They wanted to stay in Palestine, but they did end up coming back to Ohio State, to the United States. Sorry, I go to Ohio State, so that's why it's in my head.
Yeah. Wow. Part of what I'm hearing you guys talk about is this larger context and this larger history that I am not seeing, and I think our media, our Western media isn't covering, isn't talking about, isn't explaining. It's all very, very one-sided. I was at a protest on Sunday. It was the Texas statewide protest. There were like tens of thousands of people there, and I saw no news cameras. It was just wild to me.
Same with the DC,
Yeah, when you were in
right?
DC.
We were
Yeah.
in DC, 2 weekends ago, and there are 50 or 500,000 people, 500,000. I mean,
Yeah.
over 500,000. I mean, just absolutely, you could hear our voices echoing through the corridors of Washington, DC, right? And there's 30,000 maybe people who were paid at this pro-Israel rally.
Mhm.
And there have been a lot of TikToks too and photos of it, but it was so small. And yet every single US news syndicate was there covering live.
Right.
You get online. I mean, it's wild. It's wild. But if you don't go, you can't know. And that's the thing, right? It's the same thing with relationships too, right? I mean, so many of these things we're receiving passively, right? We just take in, we consume news and think that we're given the truth. But you have to do the research. I mean, this is a huge part of why I got so involved and invested in really understanding, like right down to the bottom. What is this really about? What is the biblical text saying to support this? Why? How are Arabs and Palestinians being represented in the biblical text?
Yeah.
Right. And actually going and doing that research. And like Rania was telling you, it is so much better now that everybody has a camera in their hand. It's so much better now that we have the capacity to see genocide in real time.
Yeah.
Real time. Because you cannot, right? You cannot deny what actual Palestinians are living through, what people in Gaza are seeing, and the tears and the pain and the starvation, right?
Mm-hmm.
They cannot hide that from us any longer. And so we have to fight for that. We have to fight for that. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free, right? We've got to ask questions. We've got to do the research. Anyway, Kendall, I know that we were going to talk a little bit about Zionism, and go ahead.
Because I think Zionism is a part of why we're getting this really one-sided perspective.
That's right. Absolutely.
So, and Paige, I think you can really help us understand that.
Yes.
But let's start at the basics in case people are new to this.
Which I'm going to stay at, because I don't want to spend too long. There's always room. I mean, we can do lives later. Rania and I have even talked about continuing this conversation, right? At this point, I think basics is great. So Zionism is a political ideology.
Yeah. So help us understand, what is Zionism?
Yeah. So
where does it come from? And then, and why, what is it contributing to this moment?
So this is 19th century. Oh, go ahead.
Add one thing to that, which is, I think it's important also, as you're explaining it, help us understand why being anti-Zionist is not the same thing as being anti-Semitic. I think that's
and I'm also, that's good. I also want to talk for briefly also about what Semitic means and what right? Because so much of this too comes down to linguistics, and language frames reality. So if we can't actually understand the original language, then this is what I always think about with the Bible and people going into churches. We've got these people standing up and preaching this text is written thousands of years ago. They don't know the original language, right? Which is interesting too, as we start to unpack then who were the original people of the land, even in Genesis, right? Mm-hmm. Who was there in the myth or in the story that's told, depending on whether you believe it or not. Of course, the original writers of the text knew it was oral and wasn't meant to be actually interpreted literally. So Zionism. So this is a political ideology, right? Beginning in the 19th century. I'm not going to get into Theodor Herzl, but he's the one who is sort of seen as the founder of this movement. And it's the idea, right, that Jews needed a homeland, and so they wanted to create or establish the state of Israel. The desire was to do so in Palestine. So World War II, and this was, Rania was kind of getting into this, and what was happening there at the beginning of the 20th century, and then what happened in World War II, right? This is when the US and other Western European countries turned their back on Jews, on these refugees who are being displaced through the genocide, through the Holocaust in World War II, right? Everyone joins together and decides, right? These countries join together and decide, all right, so let's do it now. Now's the time. Let's take over Palestine and let's create a state of Israel. What's interesting to me, right, is this land that they were claiming, interestingly, was also the land in Genesis, the land of Canaan, that Abraham, right, if we look at the text in Genesis, that Abraham also was promised by God, which I don't know if I want to unpack that just yet. So maybe we just kind of like let that kind of hang there, right? The land of Canaan, not a land that was the Hebrew people's land, right? But a land that, if we look at who the Canaanites were, who the people were that were living in that land, they were Arabs. If we actually look at history, not the biblical text. And I know this is going to be difficult for some of the audience, or some of you now, because many of us who are raised in these more conservative Christian traditions were raised to believe that these texts were actually literally true. They were historical. But I kind of look at the historicity of the Bible like I look at how I could trust Western US news, like the US news syndicates when they talk about what's happening in Palestine and Israel right now, right? This is not meant to be history. This is story. These are etiologies. They're meant to explain things, right? And so one of the things that Genesis is explaining, and Zionism, right, is connected to this ideology. One of the things that Genesis is trying to explain is why this particular group of people should have the land, even though they were not necessarily the indigenous people of the land, that God will give them a land that is not theirs, right? Mm-hmm. So when we look at Zionism and we see how insidious it is, it's actually a form of colonialism. Mm. Moving people out, indigenous people out of their land to take over land. Right? Mm-hmm. God wanted them to have the land, and I know many of you have probably thought about this, right? If God wanted them to have the land, why would blood need to be spilled in order to have that land, to take that land? So Zionism, then, a political ideology about sort of taking over this space and creating a state of Israel. Now, when we look at Christian Zionism, and the reason, right, that so many Christians often are in support of and in favor of this idea is coming from this idea that the return of the Jews to Palestine or the Holy Land is actually in accordance with biblical prophecy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that once Jews, right, can take over all of Israel, again, this is exactly what colonialism is. Once they can take over all of this land, then Christ will come again. This is that eschatological gathering of Israel, right?
Right.
And I know you're very familiar with this, Kendall. But the last thing that I want to say, and then you may have something to say, and Rania, you as well, right? Zionism is not Judaism, right? Zionism also, right? It's important to understand that this idea entailing colonization and displacement has nothing to do with the tenets of Judaism or the faith of Judaism. Right. Because if we actually look at the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the Tanakh, right, what we see is text after text that basically says, right, the foreigners residing among you must feed them, right, clothe the orphans and feed the widows, and right, do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, right, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat, on and on, right. The idea behind the Torah, the teaching of the Torah, is actually to welcome strangers and to live in peace in the land, right? Which in fact is what you also see more in the Quran, though there are in the Hebrew Bible or the Torah, there also are teachings that do support colonization, but this is a lot of the Bible, right? It's very contradictory, which many rabbis would say, absolutely it is, right? We're supposed to argue. We're supposed to discuss. There's not supposed to be one uniform way. But let me say this. Anti-Semitism. And I want to leave it here. So if we look at the root of the word Semitic, the root of that word is Shem. Shem is a word that in both Arabic and in Hebrew means the name. Shem is the word that is used to honor and acknowledge the divine. So here's what's so wild to me, right? Oh, Shem is also the name of one of Noah's sons, who is seen as sort of like the, I guess a predecessor to both the both Arabs and Jews, or the Hebrew people, I should say. So here's the deal, right? If Semitic, if this word means both Arabic and Hebrew people, right? Speakers of these languages, Arabic and Hebrew, right? Then anti-Semitism is not just prejudice against Jews. By definition, it is also prejudice against Arabs.
Say that again.
By definition, anti-Semitism is not just prejudice, discrimination, and dehumanization against Jews. It is also against Arabs. And the thing that we have to get real clear on, right, is that excluding Arabs from this notion is in fact anti-Semitic. It is a form of racism and ethnocentrism.
Mm. Mm.
So this is why, right? Like so much of this conversation, it's difficult when you actually start to educate yourself. It's very difficult to stomach because you begin to see that so much of what is happening is absolutely political, and that religious ideology, that theology, that sacred texts have been deployed in an effort to undergird, to support, to justify the taking of a land. And the reason that they want to take the land, and I'll stop here, right, is absolutely because of where this land is in the world and what it has under it also, right? This is for economic purposes, political purposes, right? You think about where, and right, and I wish we had a map right now of where the United States has bases, right, military bases, and actually has allies who they're in fact fueling the military industrial complex there. They're actually, giving them weapons, right? But two really integral places are Israel and also the Philippines, because those are very critical points on the map and places that the United States wants to have a foothold, so that they can actually be able to have, access and more control. Anyway, so.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, I remember being a child and learning that, like, that whole end times theology, and that,
Yes.
like, like,
Yes.
once Israel was a state or whatever, then Christ would return. And, like, as a kid, it never occurred to me that like, what we're saying, you have to wipe out people in
Yes.
order for Christ to come back. Like, what religion is this? Get me out of it. Like,
Yes.
no, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
the violence that it entails, right? The
yes,
violence that it would entail,
yeah.
right? And that's what's so wild, Kendall. I think about this, and Rania and I have had so many conversations about this, because you look at the Quran, right? And there's this beautiful book by Khaled Abu El Fadl, and it's called The Place of Tolerance in Islam. And what he's basically talking about is, in Islam, you don't see this. There's not an antagonistic relationship, which is set up right there in Genesis 12. I mean, even before Genesis 12, really. But in Genesis 12 and on, when we look at Abraham, or Ibrahim, right, the founding father of this great faith and the Abrahamic faith traditions, right, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, right? But who was the very first son who was born to him? Ishmael. 12 tribes of Ishmael, right?
Mhm.
There you have it, right? And who is the second son? The second son was Isaac, right? And yet Isaac was given primacy, right? Ishmael was cast out. Ishmael represents Islam, right? The 12 tribes, right? These are Arab people who were already there. They were the original. They get the birthright. They get the land. But here we have this trope that then blesses the secondborn and gives the secondborn the land, who is representing Judaism, right? And who ultimately, like, then later on will represent Israel, right? It's a trope that in fact is trying to justify the supplanting of these people, right? The taking of the indigenous people's lands.
Mhm.
Right. And it's like, and then their relationship is set up as contentious, right?
Yeah.
Their relationship is set up as antagonistic. And yet you look at the Quran and it says, listen, we're like, and I'm looking at these quotes from here. The idea, right, is that we can all live in harmony.
Mhm.
There are multiple paths to salvation. The Quran is teaching this. And then that's why when Rania was talking about that, like, churches also were being attacked, have been
Mhm.
blown up, because there are Christians who are Palestinian, right?
Right.
I mean, Jesus was a Palestinian Jew,
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, okay, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's just so much we could talk about. We could go on for a long time. I have one more question for you all, but while we're talking about this last question, I'm just gonna invite people who are listening to just comment with what are the questions you have. What would do you want to learn more about? What are you still curious about? And we're not going to be able to get to it today, but we're going to continue doing some of these educational lives and TikToks. And so kind of let us know in the comments what do you want to see more of? What are your questions? And we'll try to address some of those things in the future. Um
Can I say
So
something really quick though? Sorry,
yeah,
I'm so sorry because Rania actually just reminded me of something that is so profound, which I haven't even gotten into my whole sort of diatribe on Jesus and Jesus followers and what the heck are we doing? Like but Rania, say this because this is so beautiful. Or I mean, I can say it, but I love it. Gaza, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, Gaza has had multiple churches and mosques being destroyed. But, the thing that a lot of people want to ignore and just, completely put blinders on when they see the numbers and the people being killed is that the some of the oldest Palestinian Christians in the world are being wiped off the earth right now
mm,
with the airstrikes happening in Gaza. Like, and when I say the oldest, like these people are part of the lineages that date back to Jesus.
mm, mm,
So,
mm.
you know,
So what do you want to do with them? Are we gonna sorry.
no, you can go, you can go.
Well, no, but that's just it. Is we're in the process of displacing. But for those of you who are Zionists and Christian Zionists, these people, in fact, are directly connected to Jesus, right? You know
Mm.
what I mean? And you want so what do we do with them as we're trying to create Israel, the state of Israel?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I just that was such an important point. I feel like.
No, I think that's so important. And okay, so to I hate to say close this out because gosh, there's so many more directions and things we could talk about, but we have to end this at some point. Um, I wanna hear from you, like, what do you want to see your fellow American citizens doing in response to this genocide? I mean, obviously, there's a lot that we want the people in power to do, and they aren't doing it, but I'm asking you to talk to the average person who is watching this happen and doesn't feel like they have much power. Like, what do you wanna say to them? What would you wanna ask of them?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with this one. I think that like this comment from Courtney, I'm seeing I call my reps daily, I send my emails and fax to my reps daily, I follow Palestinian accounts. That all of those is what I was going to tell you to do. First and foremost is call your representatives every single day. And if you don't want to talk to them or talk to people answering the line, call after hours and leave it on the voicemail because they're required to write it down.
Mm,
And it doesn't seem like the messages are getting through, but we are seeing some results. Again, very slowly, too slow for for what's going on and how fast people need to be moving. But we are starting to see more people calling for a ceasefire. We are seeing the Senate just deny the $14.3 billion in aid that they're trying to send to Israel, on top of the billions in tax dollars every single year that we're sending to Israel for their military aid. And so, watching the movies that I listed, and we'll post them later. I'll give you guys the list that you can watch. You know, sharing with people, not just on social media. I love sharing on social media. I think that everyone needs to blow up their social media pages as much as possible to share what's happening. But just don't be afraid to, it's easier said than done for me to say, don't be afraid to speak up. But if I, as a Palestinian, can sit on a live and tell you, speak up, don't be afraid to speak up in your everyday life and whatever you're doing at work, with your coworkers, with your friends, at the gym, wherever you are. Do not be afraid to speak up because one by one, you're going to start changing people's minds when they start hearing other stories. Think about the Palestinian voices that you're hearing, whether it's me, whether it's, Matez or Plestia or Hind or any of these people in Gaza that we're following right now, watching what's happening. Palestinian organizations to donate to. My personal favorite is PCRF. I love PCRF. There's also the Palestinian Red Crescent Society you can donate to. You can, those are my two biggest ones that I would say. PCRF is definitely 100%. We know where the money goes. If that's something that worries you, we see the results. We've seen the kids. We've seen everything that they can do. And I know that they're expanding after this to make sure that everyone in Gaza is getting the help that they deserve. And,
that's the
I
Palestinian Children's
Palestinian Children's Relief Fund.
Relief Fund. Yeah, okay. Keep going.
And something I want to leave with to like from my end, like something I want people to sit with is I want to share this quote from Khadija Dajani. It's about a Palestinian. It's about an Arabic word. The word is kahid. There's no English equivalent to the Arabic word kahid. The dictionary says it's anger, but it's not. It's when you take anger, you place it on a low fire, you add injustice, oppression, racism, dehumanization to it, and you leave it to cook slowly for a century. And then you try to say, but no one hears you. So it sits in your heart and it settles in your cells and it becomes your genetic imprint and then moves through generations. And one day you find yourself unable to breathe. It washes over you and demands to break out of you. You weep and the cycle repeats. And I just want to say that to remind people this is what the Palestinians are living with every single day. And we've been living with it since before this aggression has started on Gaza. We're living with it every day since then. We're going to continue to live with it until Palestine is liberated. And so I say that because I don't want anyone to give up. You know, we've been fighting this for centuries, for decades, for every single day of our lives. And we are seeing results the more and more that we push. And so just keep pushing, keep calling, join the boycotts, join the boycott against Starbucks, join the boycott against McDonald's, against Disney, against Sabra Hummus, again, all these different brands. And we'll provide those lists if you want those as well. Thank you.
I almost don't want to say anything because I want to leave, just let Rania's voice resonate. I just maybe Leasad said white silence is violence. You know, we heard during Black Lives Matter, right, over and over again, silence is complicity. And we were saying that, and we were believing that, and we were marching. And I think now white silence is violence. I mean, that's it. Get out and protest on your own feeds, on your stories, on your pages, right? It's so important that you are lifting up the voices of Palestinians, that you are just bombard, just go, because the more really views that they're getting, the more we're going to be able to get the information out there, the more they'll know they're supported, that we see them, right? And things will change, but we cannot give up. So again, right, especially if you are a white person, and there are a lot of things that we didn't get to unpack together, but especially if you're a white person, please fucking do the work. Please do research. Please listen to the voices of these Palestinians, brown and Black people, indigenous people, right? But right now, hear their stories, understand their stories, and do everything that you can to truly, truly tap into genuine compassion, because that will lead you to act. Now is not the time for inactivity. Now is not the time for claiming that, that we're tired or that this is difficult. I mean, this is their daily life every freaking day. We have this privilege. So let us use the power that we have to do something.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you all so much.
Kendall, thank you for making this space possible, honestly.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to both of you. And thank you to those who have been listening, to those who will listen later, and continue to send in your comments about how else we can help you learn and take action. And be sure you follow NSP. And is there anything else that needs to be said before we close up today? Okay. All right.
Free Palestine. Free Palestine.
Amen. Yeah. All right. Thank you.